Next caller on the phone, welcome to our Sunday afternoon question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
Hi, Chris. How are you? I hope you're feeling well. Chris, I still have quite a few friends that are in the church, and many of them were former family radio listeners. And I get into discussions with them, and I sometimes have a hard time answering the question about 70 A.D. To go through passages in Matthew 24 and in Luke 21 and Mark 13, and I sometimes will stumble on myself trying to come up with a easy, concise answer of why that is wrong. I've had teachers that have taught, particularly in Luke, in Luke 21, that God is going back and forth in that passage. At one point, he's talking about the end of the world, and then at the other point, he's talking about 70 A.D. And I was wondering if you could help me out with kind of a clear talk track on how 70 A.D. is absolutely not being spoken about in those passages.
Well, yes. I understand what you're asking. And, well, first of all, we don't read about 70 A.D. in the Bible. The biblical history does not get into the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 A.D. That is found in church history, secular history. But I would ask them, well, show me where in the Bible it describes the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. And the Bible does not get into that. So what they're doing is they're looking outside the Bible and finding a historical event that was not really addressed in the Bible, and they're saying, now this is what Jesus was referring to, and so that's one problem. And I think the best way to answer it is to read Matthew 24, and it says in the first few verses, beginning in verse 1, "And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? That is, the one stone not being upon the other in the temple. When shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" And so you might be familiar with Mr. Camping's response, which was a good one. And that was to point out that over in Jerusalem, they still have certain portions of the temple where there is more than one stone upon another. So for those who look at the Bible literally, well, they do not have a literal solution, because everything should be completely demolished without a single stone upon another. So that again is a difficulty in their understanding. But you see, the disciples are asking not only about the destruction of the temple, but also what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world. And as we read Jesus' response, we find reference to the end again and again. Verse 13, "But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." Verse 15, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. And then when you go back to the book of Daniel, as we were just directed to do, and we read of the abomination, it's mentioned, I think, at least 3 times. And in each place, it's in the context of the end of the world. A vision God was giving Daniel concerning the end of the world. So verse 13, 14, 15, it is all addressing the end of the world. And verse 16 says, then let them which be in Judea. That's carried over from verse 15, speaking of the abomination of desolation. And if you speak to the people who point to 70 AD, they try to say something of some historical thing. Was the abomination brought into the temple? It's just more natural-minded reasoning that gets people out of the Bible, and yet they don't address that it's the abomination spoken of by Daniel in the context of the end of the world. So the verse 16 is flowing forth from verse 15 in the previous verses, dealing with the end of the world. Then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. And what we read of coming out of Judea must take effect at the time of the end of the world. Not in 1st century or 2nd century or any other century, but the time of the end of the world. And the end of the world stage of history began in the 20th century, in the year 1988. That's when God began to bring about the Great Tribulation, and all the time since. We're in the last stages of Earth's history. We're at the time of the end. And I would just keep pointing them to the Bible. Look at the question that's in the Bible. And it links the not one stone upon another with the sign of Christ coming in the end of the world. And so too does verse 15 lead into verse 16, tie in with the end of the world. And that's what Jesus is addressing. But thank you for calling and sharing.